It's 4:47 on a Thursday afternoon. Simone Adeyemi is sitting in her car in the parking lot of a building she has worked in for 4 years. She is not leaving. She cannot bring herself to go back inside. 23 minutes ago, in a team meeting she had spent 6 days preparing for, she had presented the most thorough strategic proposal of her career. Data sourced, slides polished, argument built with the precision of someone who had stayed until 11 p.m. 3 nights running to get it right. And before she had finished her third slide, her colleague David had said, not aggressively, not loudly, in the specific conversational tone that is somehow worse than aggression, "Has anyone else tried this approach before? I just want to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel." The room had shifted. She had kept presenting. She had finished. The senior director had said the proposal was interesting, and they discussed further. That was 23 minutes ago. She is 34 years old, Lagos-born, Chicago-raised, MBA from Northwestern. The kind of person who, on paper, in resume form, in the abstract reads as someone who should not be shaken by a single sentence from a colleague in a Thursday afternoon meeting. And yet, she is sitting in the parking lot unable to go back inside. Not because David's comment was accurate, not because her proposal was flawed, not because the room had rejected her, because something in that moment, in the specific timing of the interruption, in the particular framing of the doubt, in the way the room's energy had shifted 2 degrees cooler before she had finished her opening, had triggered something old. Something that had been triggered before. Something that has been getting triggered her entire career. She doesn't have a name for it yet. She doesn't know yet that what David did has a name. That it has been studied, mapped, and practiced throughout history by people who understood, with predatory precision, the exact mechanism that makes expanding people make themselves smaller. She doesn't know yet that what she feels in her chest right now is not insecurity. It is the residue of a comparison designed to reduce her. And she doesn't know that the Stoics people, who faced versions of this in the most politically sophisticated civilization that ever existed, built a response that David and everyone like him cannot touch. This is the story of how one woman stopped shrinking, and the principle that made it permanent. Before Simone's full story, before the framework, one thing needs to be said with complete directness. What happened in that meeting room was not accidental. It was not David being thoughtless. It was not a poorly timed comment from someone who didn't realize the impact. It was not a misunderstanding that a direct conversation could fully repair. It was a specific social mechanism practiced, recognizable, ancient, that has one function and one function only: to return an expanding person to a size that is more comfortable for the people around them. The Stoics called it inverted comparison, the deliberate framing of another person's competence as deviation from a norm, rather than as evidence of capability. Has anyone else tried this? It is not a question about methodology, it is a question about standing. It is asking the room, should we grant this person the authority their preparation has earned? And it is asking it crucially, before the answer is clear, before the evidence is fully presented, in the moment when the person presenting is most vulnerable to having the room's read of them set. It is a preemptive reduction, and it works on almost everyone, almost every time, including people who are intelligent enough to recognize it while it is happening. Because recognition is not protection. Knowing you are being reduced does not stop the reduction from landing. The mechanism is not intellectual. It operates beneath the rational system in the part of the brain that monitors social standing, that reads the room's temperature, that knows, with millisecond precision, when the group has shifted its evaluation. Simone felt the shift. She kept presenting. She finished. And then she sat in a parking lot for 23 minutes because the accumulated cost of absorbing that shift and the dozens of shifts before it, across 4 years, across a career, across a life in rooms where her expansion made certain people uncomfortable, had finally exceeded what she could process silently. She was not broken. She was overloaded. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole story. Simone Adeyemi had been the most capable person in most rooms she had ever occupied. She knew this. Not arrogantly. She was not a person given to arrogance, which was itself part of the problem. She knew it the way you know things that are simply observable, by watching how outcomes aligned with effort, by the consistent pattern of being the person others came to when something difficult needed solving, by the specific quality of the work she produced, and the reliability with which it exceeded what was asked of her. She had been this way since secondary school in Chicago. The student who finished first, who asked the question the teacher hadn't anticipated, who saw the third-order implication of the problem before the class had finished understanding the first. She had learned early not from instruction, but from the accumulated feedback of the social environment that this quality had a cost. Not always, not in every room, but in enough rooms, consistently enough, that the lesson had installed itself in her behavior the way early lessons do. Completely, invisibly, at the level of reflex rather than choice. The lesson was, calibrate. Read the room, adjust the output. Present enough to be seen as capable, not so much as to make the calibration visible to the people who find it uncomfortable. She had become extraordinarily good at this. So good that most people around her, colleagues, managers, friends, had no idea the calibration was happening. They experienced Simone as bright, capable, thorough. They did not experience her as what she actually was, which was a person operating at approximately 70% of her actual range, with the remaining 30 held carefully back in a place where it couldn't generate the specific social friction that full expression had repeatedly produced. For 11 years, she had been doing this. She had been shrinking herself to fit the room she was in, and the rooms had become comfortable with the smaller version, which meant that on a Thursday afternoon, when she brought the full version, 6 days of preparation, the complete argument, the real proposal David had, experienced it not as contribution but as disruption, and the room had briefly agreed with him. That was what she was sitting with in the parking lot, not the comment. The 11-year architecture that had made the comment land. She called her mentor that evening. Dr. Patricia Osei, professor of organizational behavior at the University of Chicago, Simone's academic advisor during her MBA, the person who had first told her, in those direct words, that she had a habit of making herself smaller in rooms where her size was threatening. She hadn't been ready to hear it then. She told Dr. Osei what had happened. Dr. Osei listened without interrupting, a quality Simone had always admired in her. The specific patience of someone who understands that the most important information in any account arrives at the end, after the person has processed through the surface layers. When Simone finished, Dr. Osei said one thing. He compared you to everyone who had never tried. That's not feedback about your idea. That's feedback about his comfort level with your ambition. Simone said nothing for a moment. The Stoics had a specific word for what David did, Dr. Osei continued. They called it diminutio, the act of framing someone's excellence as an anomaly requiring justification rather than a standard requiring respect. Marcus Aurelius dealt with it constantly, from senators, from military commanders, from people who had everything to lose from the emperor being more capable than they'd prefer. What did he do about it? Simone asked. He didn't defend himself, Dr. Osei said. He expanded. That word, expanded, not responded, not countered, not justified or explained or softened the edges of the proposal to make it more palatable to people who were made uncomfortable by its full size. Expanded. Simone wrote the word on the back of a receipt in her car. She kept it in her wallet for the next 4 months. Here is what the Stoics understood about toxic comparison and silent insecurity that most modern conversations about workplace dynamics consistently miss. The comparison is never about you. This sounds obvious. It is not, because even the people who say it's not about you are usually saying it as comfort, as a way of reducing the sting of the experience. The Stoics were saying something structurally different. They were saying the comparison is not about you in the precise operational sense. It is about the person making it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change." And then, in the same breath, but show me. Don't merely assert it. The distinction is surgical. Genuine feedback, the kind that makes you better, the kind that is worth receiving and integrating, has evidence. It has specificity. It engages with the actual content of what you have done or said and identifies with precision what is wrong and why. The diminutio comparison, has anyone else tried this? I just want to make sure, has none of that. It has no evidence, no specificity, no engagement with the content. It has only implication. And the implication is not about the quality of your proposal. It is about the social permission structure. It is asking the room, Are we going to grant this person the standing their work implies, or are we going to return her to the standing we were comfortable with? The person making the comparison is insecure. Not in the obvious sense, not visibly, not in ways that would make the dynamic legible to the room, in the specific sense that their internal security requires that the people around them remain at a predictable size, that the hierarchy of capability in the room remains familiar, that the social order does not shift in ways that require them to recalibrate their own position. When you expand, when you bring the full version into the room, you are not threatening them with aggression. You are threatening them with excellence. And excellence, to the person whose security depends on the room staying calibrated to a certain level, is the most destabilizing thing you can bring. The Stoics understood this with clinical precision, and they built their response around one foundational recognition. The person who asks you to justify your excellence is not a judge. They are a person asking you to shrink. The answer is always the same. Don't. Let's be exact about the mechanism, because naming it precisely is the first act of refusing to be governed by it. Toxic comparison, the specific kind that operates as silent insecurity weaponized against expanding people, has 4 recognizable forms. They arrive in different registers. They come from different people in different contexts. But the structure is identical and the function is always the same. Form 1. The precedent question. Has anyone else done this? Is this how it's normally done? I just want to make sure we have context. This form appears to be due diligence. It is not. Due diligence asks about evidence. The precedent question asks about permission. It is asking, does this person's idea have the endorsement of people we've already decided to trust? And because genuinely original thinking, by definition, does not have that endorsement, the question cannot be answered satisfactorily. The trap is structural. The person who brought something new is now defending it against a standard it was never designed to meet. Form 2. The credentialing challenge. What's your background in this area? Have you worked in this space before? This form attacks standing rather than content. It does not engage with the quality of the argument. It redirects the conversation to the biography of the person making it, specifically to the parts of the biography that are most easily questioned. Its function is to insert doubt about the speaker's authority before the room has formed its own assessment of the work. It is preemptive standing reduction. Form 3. The comparative diminishment. That reminds me of what someone else did. Have you looked at that person's approach? This form is the most sophisticated and the most damaging. It does not attack. It simply places you inside a comparison, usually to someone more established, more male, more senior, more like what the room defaults to, and invites the implicit question, why reinvent what already exists? Its function is erasure through association. Not your idea is wrong, but your idea is derivative of someone else who was here first, which is almost always factually incorrect, but emotionally destabilizing in ways that factual correction cannot fully address. Form 4. The quiet withdrawal. This is the one with no words. The slight cooling of the room's energy, the eye contact that doesn't quite land, the supportive colleague who seems fractionally less engaged than usual. The meeting that ends without the direct acknowledgement, the preparation warranted. This form is the hardest to name and the hardest to address because it leaves no evidence, nothing was said, nothing happened. You walked in with a full proposal and walked out with a vague sense that the room had decided something it didn't announce. This form is what Simone had been absorbing in accumulation for 11 years. Each individual instance deniable. The pattern, unmistakable to anyone willing to look at the full picture, was the quiet, consistent instruction to remain at the size the room had decided was appropriate. These are not mantras, not affirmations, not the self-help instruction to believe in yourself harder. These are precise, operational principles from Stoic philosophy that change the architecture of how you occupy a room permanently. Principle 1. Euthymia, the tranquility of your own standard. Epictetus wrote, "Never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it." Don't care about feedback. Don't locate your standard in the room's response. Your standard, the measure against which your work is assessed, cannot be the room. The room changes. The room is composed of people with their own insecurities, their own agendas, their own comfort levels with your expansion. The room will tell you to be smaller because small is comfortable and large as threatening. Euthymia is the practice of maintaining your own internal standard regardless of the room's temperature. Specifically, before any significant presentation, any room where your full expression is likely to generate friction, establish your standard privately. Ask yourself one question. By my own honest assessment, is this the best work I am capable of producing? If yes, the room's response is not a verdict, it is data. Interesting, sometimes useful, occasionally actionable, but never definitive. The verdict is already in. You gave it to yourself. The room cannot override it. This is not arrogance. It is the refusal to outsource your standard to people whose interest in accurate assessment may be compromised by their interest in keeping you calibrated. Principle 2. The magnanimitas, move, expand, don't defend. Magnanimitas, greatness of soul. The Latin term the Stoics used for the specific quality of a person who does not reduce themselves under social pressure has a specific behavioral expression. When the comparison arrives, when the precedent question, the credentialing challenge, and the comparative diminishment lands in the room, the instinctive response is to defend, to justify, to provide the evidence that was never honestly requested. The Stoics would say, wrong direction. Defending your position in response to a social attack gives the attack standing. It accepts the frame that there is something to defend. It places you in the position of the accused, which is exactly the position the comparison was designed to create. The magnanimitas move is not defense, it is expansion. Not louder, not more aggressive, more complete. When David said, "Has anyone else tried this?" The defense move is to list precedents, to qualify, to demonstrate that the idea is not as unfamiliar as the question implies. The expansion move is to say, calmly, with complete authority, this approach addresses a specific gap that existing methods haven't solved. Here's precisely how. And then continue presenting. Not acknowledging the challenge as legitimate, not rising to the bait, simply moving forward with more of the work, more of the argument, more of the full version that the room needed to see. The expansion move does three things simultaneously. It refuses to accept the diminished standing the comparison attempted to assign. It demonstrates the competence that makes the comparison's implication absurd. And it returns the room's attention to the actual content, the one place where the comparison cannot compete. Expand, don't defend. Principle 3. Identify the source logos versus pathos. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. Know them for what they are." When the comparison arrives, the Stoic practice is a 2-second internal diagnostic that changes the entire response architecture. Is this coming from logos, from reason, from evidence, from a genuine engagement with the content? Or is this coming from pathos, from emotion, from discomfort, from the specific anxiety of a person whose internal security requires that the room not shift? Logos-based feedback deserves full engagement. It deserves the honest response, the update, the integration. It is the kind of challenge that makes work better. Pathos-based comparison deserves precisely nothing. Not engagement, not defense, not the emotional investment of a response that treats it as legitimate criticism. The 2-second diagnostic separates them. What is the evidence behind this? If there is specific, honest evidence, engage fully. If there is no evidence, if the question is structural, designed to destabilize rather than improve, the only appropriate response is to continue forward, undisturbed. The refusal to be disturbed by baseless comparison is not passive. It is the most powerful statement you can make about the quality of your own assessment of your work. Principle 4. The sympathia reframe. Understand the smallness without absorbing it. The Stoics taught sympathia, the interconnection of all things, the recognition that every person's behavior is a product of their entire history, their fears, their unchallenged defaults. David's comment did not come from a place of strength. It came from a place of specific, if unexamined, insecurity about what Simone's full expression represented in that room's hierarchy. Understanding this is not sympathy in the soft sense. It is the precision of a person who recognizes that the weapon pointed at them was built out of the person's own limitations, not out of accurate assessment of their target. The person who compares you downward is telling you something important not about you, but about themselves, about what your expansion cost them, about what the room's recalibration would require of their own self-concept. They are telling you that you are larger than the size they need you to be. That information is not painful. That information is a measurement. It is the room confirming that the full version of you does not fit comfortably inside the space certain people have assigned you. The appropriate response to that confirmation is not to make yourself smaller. It is to find rooms that were built for your actual size, and, where necessary, to expand the room you are in. Principle 5. Praxis consistent action as the only permanent answer. Marcus Aurelius returned to this in Meditations with the consistency of a man who had been told, repeatedly, that his approach was anomalous by senators, by historians, by the entire social machinery of an empire that had preferences about what an emperor looked like and how he behaved. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not argue for your right to be one. Not defend the definition. Not wait for the room to grant permission. Be one." The only permanent, unassailable response to the person who tells you that your excellence requires justification is excellence, sustained over time without requiring their validation for continuation. Not one exceptional proposal. An unbroken pattern of exceptional proposals, not one day when the full version shows up. A career built on the full version showing up regardless of who is comfortable with it. The comparison cannot survive the accumulation. You can compare someone's first proposal to an unnamed standard. You cannot compare their 10th exceptional year to anything comfortable. The body of work becomes the answer the room could never give. Here is what the research says and why the Stoic framework is not just philosophy, but neurological precision. The specific discomfort that Simone felt when the room shifted the 2-degree cooling, the slight repositioning of the group's read of her, was not imagined. It was real, neurologically registered, and it activated systems that were never designed to be rational. The brain's social monitoring system, located primarily in the medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex, operates continuously, tracking social standing with the same urgency. It tracks physical safety, not metaphorically. The same neural circuitry, the same activation pattern. When Simone's standing shifted in that room, her brain processed it with the same threat response it would have generated for a physical challenge. This is why knowing that the comparison was baseless did not stop it from landing. The rational system, the part that can evaluate evidence and assess the accuracy of the challenge, comes online after the social monitoring system has already fired. The social threat response is faster than the rational response, always, which means the feeling comes before the analysis. And the feeling, the specific, familiar sensation of being returned to a smaller size, carries significant momentum before the rational mind can assess whether it deserves to. Research on what psychologists call stereotype threat, the phenomenon where awareness of a negative comparison reduces cognitive performance in real time, shows that even high-performing individuals show measurable performance decrements when their standing is implicitly questioned in a relevant domain. The effect is not trivial. Studies across multiple domains show performance reductions of between 8 and 20% on tasks that require working memory and executive function. Precisely the cognitive resources needed for presentation, argumentation, and clear thinking under pressure. The toxic comparison is not just uncomfortable, it is cognitively expensive. The Stoic practices, specifically euthymia, the maintenance of internal standard regardless of external temperature function, as a buffer against the stereotype threat mechanism. Research on what psychologists call self-affirmation, the deliberate activation of core values before performance-relevant tasks, shows consistent reductions in stereotype threat effects. The Stoics did not have fMRI machines. They had 2,000 years of observation of human performance under social pressure. They arrived at the same intervention. Establish your own standard before entering the room. Don't let the room set it for you. Let's be direct about the arithmetic, because this is not an abstract conversation about dignity. It has concrete, calculable costs. The person who calibrates their output to the comfort level of the room is not just limiting their own experience. They are limiting their contribution. They are producing a fraction of what they are actually capable of and calling it professionalism. And the room is complicit in this. Not maliciously, in most cases, comfortably. The room benefits from the calibration, the social hierarchy remains stable. The expanding person remains at a size that requires no one else to recalibrate their own position. The meeting ends without the particular friction that full expression sometimes generates. The room is comfortable. The person who calibrated is not. Research on career trajectory and self-silencing behavior. The specific pattern of withholding ideas, moderating ambition, and adjusting expression to match perceived group preferences shows consistent, significant associations with lower career advancement, higher rates of chronic stress, and most striking higher rates of what researchers call emotional labor exhaustion. The specific burnout that comes not from too much work, but from the continuous effort required to maintain a smaller version of yourself in spaces that are not built for your full range. Simone was experiencing this in the parking lot. Not failure, not inadequacy. Exhaustion from the 11-year performance of smallness. That exhaustion has a cost that most people pay without ever calculating it, because it doesn't announce itself as exhaustion from shrinking. It announces itself as burnout, as imposter syndrome, as the vague sense that you are working very hard and arriving somewhere smaller than you should be. The diagnostic is simple. Are you tired from the work, or are you tired from managing the version of yourself you're allowed to bring to the work? Those are different kinds of tired. Only one of them is solved by rest. The other is solved by expansion. Here is the thing that nobody in the professional development space says directly, and that the Stoics said so plainly it still has the capacity to sting 2,000 years later. The people who tell you to shrink are not your measure. They never were. The room's comfort level with your size is not data about your size. It is data about the room. A measuring tape does not become wrong because the wall it's measuring is shorter than expected. You do not become smaller because the room was not built for your dimensions. Marcus Aurelius wrote not as inspiration, not for a posterity that he didn't expect to read his private notes. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason, which today arm you against the present. And then, in the same volume, in the same private voice, it is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. Never beginning to live. Not beginning to fail. Not beginning to be too ambitious. Not beginning to exceed the room's comfort with your excellence. Beginning to live. The person who calibrates themselves to the size of the most threatened person in the room is not being modest. They are not being professional. They are not making the strategic, long-term choice that will eventually be rewarded with permission to be larger. They are not beginning to live. And the years of calibration, the 11 years of the full version being held back, of the 30% that was too much for rooms that preferred the 70, those years do not come back. The cost of shrinking is not just the proposals that were smaller than they should have been, it is the person you were while you were making them smaller. The person you were practicing being, the person you were becoming through the daily, repeated, accumulated act of making yourself fit. That person is not you. That person is the room's preferred version of you. And the room does not have to live inside that person. You do. Simone went back inside the building at 5:23 p.m. Not to confront David, not to reopen the meeting, not to demand the acknowledgement the proposal had earned. She went back inside to send one email to the senior director. Clear, direct, 2 paragraphs. The full version of the argument, the parts she had held back in the meeting, the third-order implications she had decided might be too much, the complete picture she had constructed over 6 days and then edited down to what she had estimated the room could receive. The full version, without calibration. The senior director replied at 7:14 a.m. the next morning. This is exactly what I needed to see. Can we find 45 minutes this week? Not because the calibrated version had been wrong, because the full version was right. She called Dr. Osei after the reply arrived. He responded, she said. Of course he did, Dr. Osei said. He's a person who needed to see the whole thing. You assumed the room couldn't hold it. You were wrong about the room. I was wrong about the room, Simone repeated. She had been wrong about the room for 11 years. Not because the rooms were always safe, some of them weren't. David was real. The pattern was real. The 2-degree cooling was real and had real effects. But she had been calibrating to the most threatened person in every room. And the most threatened person in any room is never the most important person in it. She put the receipt with the word expanded on her desk. She kept it there. Marcus Aurelius was described by his contemporaries, including people who did not admire him, including political opponents, with every reason to minimize him as a man who occupied the most powerful position in the ancient world, and somehow gave the impression of being larger than even that. Not louder, larger. The specific quality that made him remarkable was not his power. It was his refusal to perform smallness for the comfort of anyone around him, including, and especially, people who would have preferred an emperor who was more predictable in his dimensions. He was not immune to the diminutio comparison. The historical record is full of senators and military advisors who questioned his approaches, challenged his standard, framed his philosophy as anomalous, inappropriate for the office, too idealistic for the demands of empire. He did not defend. He expanded. And what he built, the body of work, the private philosophy, the 19-year reign, the meditations that were never meant to be read and have now been read for 2,000 years, is the permanent, unassailable answer to every comparison that was ever made against him. The body of work outlasted the people who were uncomfortable with its size. It always does. Your full expression will outlast the room's discomfort with it. Not if you protect it, only if you stop hiding it. Before you close this video, I want you to locate the calibration. Not in the abstract. Specifically, think about the room you have been editing yourself for. The version of your work, your ideas, your full expression that you have been holding at the door because you estimated the room could not hold it. The 30% that never made it into the proposal. The argument you softened. The ambition you qualified. The full version that got reduced to the version that was less likely to generate the 2-degree cooling. Find it. Now ask the honest question. Whose comfort have I been protecting? Not yours. You are not more comfortable with the calibrated version. You are simply less threatened. There is a difference between comfort and safety. The calibrated version feels safer. It is not more comfortable. The full version is uncomfortable and true. The Stoics did not teach you to be reckless. They did not teach you to be aggressive or indifferent to the social consequences of your choices. They taught you that the most dangerous thing you can do with your life is spend it producing the version of yourself that the room prefers over the version that is actually yours. You were not built to fit the room. You were built to build better rooms. Stop shrinking. If this reached something, if you recognize the parking lot, the calibration, the 11 years of the full version being held at the door, share this with someone who has been editing themselves for too long. Subscribe if you want more, not for the algorithm, because there are more full versions waiting to be sent. Go send them.